Hello and welcome to CIO Leadership Live. I'm Kathy O'Sullivan, Editorial Director for CIO in Australia and New Zealand. And today I'm joined by Colin Penman, who is the Chief Information Security Officer at Datacom. Thanks for being on the show today, Colin.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Kathy, for inviting me.
Great stuff. So look, Datacom recently released its State of Cybersecurity Index, and we'll get into the findings of the report shortly. But first, tell us a bit about your career in tech and the roles that have led you up to taking on the CISO position at Datacom.
Oh, that's a tough one to talk about yourself. I've always had probably a foot in both camps of being very technical at the same time as business orientated, and that's shown within my past. I started off actually maintaining and restoring telex machines for telecom in Australia. So I've certainly seen a lot of technology changes, but those technology changes wouldn't have come unless there is a level of business and moving forward the business from an engagement point of view. So everything technology-wise has really been coupled from a business, and I've been very humbled by some of the companies that I've worked for, not only Telecom and Telstra, but other companies like IBM, Oracle, Salesforce in the early days, and areas where I started to be more focused from a CISO point of view is around Kyndryl in Australia and New Zealand, the spin out of the managed services from IBM. And then from there, joining Datacom and leading Datacom as they transitioned and really stood up a CISO's office internally.
So Datacom has released its State of Cybersecurity Index, and it found that AI-driven cyber attacks are now the number one concern for security leaders. So how do you think CIOs should rethink their security posture to adapt to, it's an ever-evolving landscape? Are Australian and New Zealand businesses adapting fast enough?
I think they're slowly maturing, I would use the word, but I'll take a step back because I think AI affects companies in a couple of different ways. We see AI coming through the supply chain. A lot of the products that we're actually using from a supply chain point of view now has AI actually embedded within those products that we're consuming that may be utilizing the data internally to learn and teach those products, as an example. So supply chain, I certainly see the requirement to not only include AI questionnaires as part of that supply chain risk point of view. We're starting to see it used internally, obviously, to build out the business value from an applications point of view, really reduce a lot of the manual tasks, repetitive tasks internally, but actually to really start to engage customers and our internal staff around what we can do better around the applications that we have. And then two things. One is the defense from AI-based security attacks. So starting to look at how AI helps us from a cybersecurity point of view. And then the way that we see, and a lot of discussion is around AI utilized within cybersecurity from threat actors. And we're really starting to see that not only from a phishing emails. Previously, you would have seen a phishing email that was poorly worded or the English wasn't spectacular. It's very, very now targeted to the individuals using AI. So those are the frameworks of what we're starting to see. But I think back to your question around how CIOs really rethink, I think they really need to think about their security posture, the landscape that they're operating in from a market point of view, adopt AI as part of that defense mechanism. But the other thing is to upskill and educate the internal teams about the use of AI internally with external AI providers, and what does it mean from a development point of view as well.
Yeah, that's interesting, the third-party risk as well. And it sounds like a lot of organizations think they're more secure than they actually are. So what are some of those common blind spots that leave them exposed, even when they think they're covered?
I think, certainly our index showed that there was a gap between where the leadership of organizations were versus the actual employees. And the employees, their awareness and the education training on the use of AI is certainly not there. And I think that's where our focus is within Datacom is not to stand up a separate artificial intelligence, but how do we actually bring that into the current organization processes, not only from a change management point of view, but from a governance and security, and even a cyber awareness training, so that we actually now incorporate AI training. And what does it mean to specifically the service desk from a deep fakes point of view, or from a phishing point of view? What do we have from a AI around phishing for our finance teams, and what do we look for around that? So really, it's to make sure that the development and the ecosystem around AI is secure, to educate and upskill the teams, but it's also around doing the right hygiene things, patching, making sure we have early detection and continuous monitoring around some of the tooling. And I know a lot of companies are moving towards a zero trust framework around multi-factor authentication and access to applications. And certainly that's where AI also adds a lot of value.
And I found the findings on the report around the human impact of cybersecurity really interesting. It showed that 61% of security leaders in New Zealand and 58% in Australia are dealing with cyber fatigue. So can you talk to us about, what is causing that burnout, and what do you think organizations can do better to support their security teams?
I think cyber fatigue is tough, right? I mean, we all take this personally. As a cyber professional, if something happens to the organization, we really do take it personally. I think the causes of cyber fatigue is really that escalating threat landscape. So it's continuously being ramped up, and we're seeing more and more, obviously, adversaries trying to get into the organization, not from a breach point of view, but it's more from a compromise of users is the main access point. But we started to see resource constraints, budgeting from a business point of view has been very constrained. We've seen that across a lot of the landscape of customers that we speak to. But other things like a disconnect with leadership, and the finding really shows that gap. 71% of New Zealand leaders think that staff are cyber ready, but only just over half, or 51% of employees agree. So there's always going to be a level of cyber education and awareness. But I think also the employees are starting to be, a bit numb to this. And we started to see that tick and flick as far as compliance and the annual attestation around cyber training. So I think that's where we've really broken it down to smaller engagement, gamification of individuals internally, where they're doing from a cyber awareness point of view, but also focusing on the profiles of the business. So what do privileged access users, what's their responsibility, and what's the short training courses that we need to do with them throughout the year? What are the developers from an AI point of view, the use of AI, open source technologies from a libraries point of view? What do we need to do from the training in that side? But also going back into finance and HR, who are very targeted within the organizations because they're receiving emails from people externally saying, open my resume, as an example. So I think training is 100% there. I think the other thing is that lack of recovery time, because we're getting, so many incidents throughout the year, we're not having the recovery time to actually focus on that mental health point of view from an organization.
Now, you spoke about it a bit there, but, we do hear that, that disconnect and that employees are the weakest link in cybersecurity. But, you spoke about training and maybe that it's not the right level of training for employees. So what is the difference between a security training program that sticks and one that employees just tune out and tick and forget?
Yeah, it's interesting once you come into an organization and see a culture, and certainly the way that we've looked at it is, how does training stick? And so certainly there's been a lot of engagement with third parties around learning styles of individuals and what the training we need to do from a cybersecurity point of view so that training sticks with individuals. And I think I touched on role-specific scenarios, I think very specific within the business. So it's just not a generic one-fits-all type of scenario. I think if it's very tailored with the language and the nuances and examples of incidents that have occurred specifically with that specific portfolio or team within an organisation, that's what sticks. Hands-on and interactive is also, gamify that with leaderboards and phishing drills as an example. But it just can't be a one big awareness program for the year. I think breaking it down into short, more frequent doses and swap it into like a 5 to 10 minute, because that's where people's attitude as far as focus goes. Anything more than 10 minutes, then it's the people have gone. And the last one, I think, is that real world context with continuous feedback. I think those are the things that really makes the cybersecurity program stick with individuals.
So another area that the report looked at was around business continuity planning and cloud security. And the research from Datacom suggests that Australia is ahead in this area over New Zealand. So what are Australian businesses doing differently, and how can New Zealand companies catch up?
I think there's been a stronger regulatory push from an Australian point of view around the ACSC, and certainly they're reporting a larger increase of cyber inquiries yearly around that. But I think there's a larger investment from a tech point of view. I can't remember who actually spoke about it, but effectively the cyber security firms, Australian firms are spending, $6.2 billion in cybersecurity in 2014, and that's a jump of over 14% from last year. But we see that continuity planning, only 26% of Australian leaders lack BC's business continuity plans, compared to that of 67% in New Zealand. And I think this is a key indicator. I think Australia and the push from a regulatory point of view, but also the number of breaches that have actually occurred within the market, Australian market, has actually meant from the board down of these organisations, there is a question of what are we doing from that resilience point of view. And business continuity planning is obviously where that fits into that governance of the organisation. I think finally around the cloud adoption, certainly Australia has been probably a little forward as far as cloud adoption and a multi-cloud strategy. And I think where New Zealand is coming into that fold now with the, obviously with Azure being in New Zealand, we started to see a lot more focus on workloads moving to the cloud in New Zealand as well.
Now, the use of tools like ChatGPT and Copilot is becoming more and more commonplace. And I think your report found 40% of employees are now using these tools, but less than a quarter of them have actually read their company's AI security policies. So, why do you think that AI governance piece is lacking behind actual AI adoption, and what needs to change from that point of view?
I think there's a few things here. I think from an adoption of AI really is outpaced a lot of the policy decisions and makers. And so certainly with our team, raising the level of maturity from AI awareness before we write a policy and actually engaging those teams who are doing a lot of application development and agent development. And we've started to see how do we actually communicate with people about the security risks and then actually have a policy discussion associated to that. So realistically, I think there's been a outdated security policies that hasn't actually included AI. And my belief is that we shouldn't be standing up separate AI policies. We should actually be embedding them in change management, in patching and in data security and privacy as well. I think there's certainly a leadership blind spot as far as people wanting to adopt it and thinking that they're ready, but they haven't done the basics of, for example, data classification. rolling out an internal AI agent, for example, that has complete access to every data and document internally. Be surprised that people will go searching, oh, what's the payroll of this and this person, or is this customer, for example. So I think making sure that those blind spots and pre-work is done around data and risk, but also the governance associated to that. And I think the last one is around, if there is policy that exists, a lot of them are not AI ready. So development is a great example of that, and also the supply chain, which we've spoken about.
Now, Colin, I know you speak to IT leaders all around Australia and New Zealand. So I'm sure you encounter organizations that really are getting cybersecurity right, although none of us is ever impenetrable. So what are the ones that are the best of breed? What are they doing differently that you think others can learn from?
I think there's a few things. I go back to the blocking and tackling, the cyber hygiene that we need to do. It's no good looking at new shiny objects if we're not doing the vulnerability assessments, we're not doing the patching, we're not doing this daily cyber hygiene and thinking of security first. And so I would say those who are doing security very well have got those programs of cyber hygiene and the day-to-day activities and the cyber first mentality in the organizations. I would say that they're doing that correct. And it's very proactive from the board and the GLT down, that it's very proactive and not reactive. And so people who are doing red teaming exercises regularly and doing phishing as an example, and as I said, doing that cyber awareness training, not just once a year, but breaking it down in multiple components. And I think the other thing is around that employee empowerment, the training in hands-on, but how do you think those phishing drills are if there's a deep fake coming in through an AI, coming through HR or into a service desk team? So there's always that constant employee empowerment to say, how do I report this? Or ask the question, to say, this doesn't feel right. How do I actually ask that and make a mechanism of reporting and asking the question from a resilience point of view easier? Because if they have to go through multiple escalations and report the incident, and they want to know right now, hey, do I respond to this? So making it easier for individuals around collaboration and the employee empowerment around that, and don't be negative if they've actually called out something and it's actually wrong. I think it's very empowering, and taking that as a use case from a learning point of view. So always try to act before the breach is a big one. Getting that leadership on board and making training stick are probably the key indicators of a successful cybersecurity program and those companies that are doing it well.
So I've heard about CISOs being referred to as the Department of No, and security is often seen as a cost or a blocker to innovations. So how do you think CIOs or CISOs can reposition cybersecurity as that business enabler rather than just that defensive function?
Yeah, I think it's knowing the business. Like what's the key indicators of the executives that we're working with as peers, and what are they rewarded upon from a revenue point of view, from a risk quantification, and trying to actually understand the business. I didn't realize Datacom is such a large elephant, from everything from a digital marketing agencies to SaaS-based applications, through to managing, federal and state and local government agencies, everything from desktop support all the way down to citizen engagement. So such a large amount of services. And so I've had to learn the business to really understand how security impacts that business, not only from a level of trust and risk, but how does it relate that back to revenue or revenue loss if something actually occurs from a cybersecurity point of view. And I think this goes back to a PwC study that I read last year around 87% of customers ditch brands after a breach. So we need to be proactive. I think the other thing is that enable faster innovation. AI is a great example of this. So instead of saying and being Dr. No, how do I provide you a development environment that actually accelerates AI advancement so they can actually try something and learn AI agents, provide obfuscated data for LLMs to be trained upon in an environment where we've got the guardrails of security and governance associated to it, so that they're not, connecting to the internet. It's a very secure environment. And if they want to then proceed into a proof of concept with a customer, again, we've gone through those security steps and engaged the gates of those developments as well. And I think that's where we start to see cybersecurity going from a cost center to being a competitive differentiator into the market as well.
So look, it's still a tricky economic time for businesses. So with budgets under pressure, where should CIOs focus their cybersecurity investments for maximum impact?
Yeah, I think going back to that cyber hygiene point of view, I think, the employee training with teeth, incentives around it, role-based focused areas. I think the more from an automation around the incident response and the AI threat detection capabilities. So we've started to see AI being brought into not only from the products into the security operations center, but how to at a network level. So a lot of the AI components from a threat prevention point of view is now coming into those environments. I think the other thing is just to make sure that security doesn't become obsolete. Looking at legacy perimeter defense strategies and static compliance tools, it's no use doing a compliance at that point of time throughout the year when customers are coming at us multiple times through every month about, what's your compliance status at this point of time? So how do we automate that compliance and become more dynamic and even empower the customers to come into a trusted site so you can actually see your environment at that point of time from a compliance point of view, and that provide that level of trust. And the last one is, companies don't like being the integrator. So instead of buying siloed point solutions, which is very disjointed and needing a lot of integration and a lot of resource management and training associated to that, how do I look at more of a platform type of architecture that stitches and stretches the dollar further from a budget point of view?
And finally, Colin, if we're having this conversation a year from now, what do you think will have changed? And, what's the next big challenges that CIOs, CISOs should be preparing for in Australia and New Zealand?
Well, firstly, I'd love to have an interview next year. I think it'd be great to take what we've discussed now and actually see where it is. But I think how to prepare is really lock AI down now. Look at the tools that people are using internally, look at the policies that we have. If there is AI development that's occurring internally, provide the guardrails and the safe place for developers to actually trial fast and build out those proof of concepts to really look at security being a part of that process instead of at the end of it saying, hey, let's now talk security. I think building resilience, not just defense. So it goes back to that business continuity guidelines and making sure that that's exercised. It's no use having a plan if you're not exercising that throughout the year. There's always going to be a discussion around upskill or outsource. And I think that's going to be a very interesting conversation in the future, especially around AI, so that teams are not getting left behind through the use of AI tools. And I think the biggest one is collaborate regionally. So it's not only across Australia and New Zealand, but it's also across different industry sectors. Some industry sectors are actually doing it, are more advanced from a cybersecurity point of view, infrastructure as code. They've passed the multi-cloud environment and now it's infrastructure as code. And developers are now pushing all the way through from code to cloud capability. So the collaboration across not only regionally, but also from an industry point of view.
It's going to be an interesting 12 months ahead. Colin Penman, Chief Information Security Officer at Datacom, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Kathy, and see you next year.